man had just left a late meeting when flashing blue lights filled his rearview mirror. He pulled his car to the side of a quiet suburban street, confident he had done nothing wrong. But within seconds, the officer's tone was sharp. His orders barked without hesitation. "Step out of the vehicle, hands where I can see them." The man complied, his tailored suit catching the streetlight as he tried to remain composed. Without warning, he was shoved against the hood of his own car, the cold metal pressing into his chest. His face showed no panic, only a quiet resolve, as bystanders gathered and raised their phones to record. Moments later, the officer reached into the glove compartment and triumphantly pulled out a small plastic bag filled with white powder. To the onlookers, it looked like an open and shut case. A respected black man, restrained in public, drugs discovered in plain sight. But what no one knew was that this moment was about to ignite a storm far bigger than one arrest. This wasn't just another traffic stop. This wasn't just another drug bust. What happened next would shake the foundations of justice in America. Because this man was not who the officer thought he was. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. As the cameras kept rolling, questions began to ripple through the crowd and later across the entire city. Who exactly was this man in the expensive suit, pinned to the hood of his own car, as if he were a common criminal? Why did Officer Townsend, a patrolman with a history many would later question, stop him in the first place? Was this truly a routine arrest, or was something far more deliberate taking shape that night? The bag of cocaine, so neatly displayed for the crowd, seemed too convenient, too sudden, raising doubts that would not be silenced. And as details began to surface, the story took a direction no one could have anticipated. By the end of this investigation, you will question everything you think you know about justice in America. Who set up Dr. Hayes? Who stood behind Officer Townsend and protected him from accountability? And who ultimately brought the truth into the light? The answers are not simple, and they are not comfortable. Long before that night on the quiet Washington street, Dr. Jonathan Hayes had built a reputation that stretched across decades. Born in Richmond, Virginia, he was raised by parents who believed fiercely in discipline, education, and faith. He graduated near the top of his class, carrying with him the values of service and integrity. In college, he majored in criminal justice, convinced that fairness within the system was not just a dream, but a responsibility. By the time he entered federal service, his name was already synonymous with professionalism and character. Over the years, his work in law enforcement reform earned him not just awards, but admiration. Photographs lined the walls of his Virginia home. Hayes shaking hands with former directors, lecturing on accountability, smiling alongside his wife Maria and their 2 children on family vacations. He had become a symbol of what many believed was possible in America. A black man rising to the top of his field, not by shortcuts, but through resilience and sacrifice. Yet even with all his accomplishments, that evening, on the hood of his own car, none of it seemed to matter. On the other side of the story stood Officer Bradley Townsend. In his precinct, he carried himself with a swagger that made colleagues uneasy. His record, though dotted with commendations, was overshadowed by something far darker. Over a span of just 5 years, Townsend had been the subject of multiple misconduct complaints, nearly all of them tied to traffic stops of young black men. Arrest photos cluttered his locker, snapshots of suspects in handcuffs that he seemed to keep as trophies. Though Internal Affairs had investigated him several times, the results always vanished into the system, cases quietly dismissed, reports mysteriously shelved. To his peers, Townsend had earned the reputation of being untouchable, shielded by a department unwilling to confront the truth. While Dr. Hayes was spending his days working on federal initiatives to hold officers accountable, Townsend was spending his nights patrolling with unchecked authority. They lived in the same city but inhabited entirely different worlds, one pushing for reform, the other resisting it with every fiber of his being. Their paths were on a collision course, and when they finally met on that suburban street, the impact was not confined to the 2 men involved. It would leave scars that stretched across neighborhoods, institutions, and lives, sparking a firestorm about trust, authority, and the fragility of justice in America. It was just after dusk when the flashing lights appeared in Dr. Jonathan Hayes's mirror. He had been driving home from an evening engagement, his mind still on the files sitting in his briefcase, when the sound of a siren cut through the silence. Hayes guided his luxury sedan to the curb, calm but puzzled, because he knew he had not violated any traffic laws. The door of the patrol car swung open, and Officer Bradley Townsend stepped out, his posture sharp, his voice immediately commanding. There was no polite request for license or registration. Instead, the order was barked with authority that felt more like accusation than procedure. "Step out of the vehicle, now." Hayes complied, opening his door slowly, his tailored suit catching the glow of the street lamps. The officer moved closer, his hand resting near his holster, his eyes locked on Hayes with suspicion that felt rehearsed. Within seconds, Townsend shoved him against the hood of the car, pressing his weight down, twisting Hayes's arm behind his back. To the growing crowd of pedestrians, it looked like domination, an officer asserting his control. Hayes remained calm, his face stoic, his silence only fueling the tension. Then came the moment that would set the internet ablaze. Townsend leaned into the car, his movements deliberate, his hand reaching into the glove compartment. When he emerged, he held in his palm a small, clear plastic bag filled with white powder. Townsend lifted it for the crowd to see, his expression shifting into a satisfied smirk. "Gotcha," he muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. The reaction was immediate. Phones shot into the air as bystanders recorded every second. A few shouted, "That's not his." Others gasped in disbelief, whispering about the man in the expensive suit who now looked no different from the countless faces they had seen splashed across crime reports. Hayes's wrists were bound in metal cuffs, his expensive watch glinting under the streetlight as the reality of the scene set in. But unlike most, he did not protest. He did not plead. He simply locked his eyes forward, as though he knew that this night, however humiliating, was not the end of his story. The officer's voice was sharp as he read out charges, dictating details with confidence. To the crowd, it seemed airtight. Drugs found in the glove box. Suspect detained without resistance. Yet as Townsend scribbled notes into the arrest report that night, one crucial detail slipped through, one entry that would come back to haunt him. It was the kind of mistake an officer could make only if he believed he would never be questioned. The kind of oversight that seemed trivial in the moment but would later unravel the entire case. The arrest report he filed that night contained one devastating mistake. By morning, the story was everywhere. A respected black man in a suit arrested for possession of cocaine splashed across headlines as though his reputation had never existed. The photos taken during the arrest circulated widely. Hayes bent over the hood of his own car, cuffs biting into his wrists, the small plastic bag of powder held up like a trophy in Townsend's hand. Television anchors repeated the same question. How could a federal employee, a man with such a clean record, be living a double life? To the casual observer, the evidence seemed damning. But to those who knew him, it was unthinkable. At home, Maria Hayes wept in disbelief, clutching framed photographs of their family, insisting to anyone who would listen, "That's not who he is." Their children avoided school, unwilling to face classmates who had seen their father paraded as a criminal on the evening news. The department moved quickly to announce an internal investigation, a routine step meant to reassure the public. But almost immediately, irregularities began to appear. When reporters requested information on Townsend's past complaints, files that once documented misconduct were suddenly inaccessible. Inquiries were met with vague responses, records conveniently misplaced. Inside the precinct, whispers grew louder about how Townsend had been shielded before, protected by a system more interested in preserving its image than confronting its flaws. Meanwhile, anonymous tips trickled into newsrooms, suggesting that Hayes had ties to known dealers, that perhaps this wasn't the first time he had crossed the line. These claims, though unverified, spread like wildfire, giving skeptics fuel to question whether Hayes was truly the man he appeared to be. The community itself was torn in half. Some pointed to Hayes's decades of service, his spotless reputation, and the improbability that he would risk everything for a few grams of cocaine. Others, weary from years of scandals and cover-ups, wondered if perhaps he was just another man who had been hiding behind status. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs both defending and condemning him. The air was thick with uncertainty, and the weight of public opinion pressed down on the Hayes family with merciless force. For many, it seemed this would end like countless other cases, an officer's word against a suspect's, the truth swallowed by the system. And then, a video surfaced. It began quietly with a shaky recording uploaded to social media late one evening. At first, it looked like just another clip from the chaotic arrest. Crowds shouting, Hayes pressed against the hood, Townsend rifling through the car. But as the footage was examined frame by frame, something alarming came into view. Just before Townsend reached into the glove compartment, his hand seemed to dip to his own belt. And when he pulled away, the plastic bag was suddenly in his grasp. Slowed down, it was undeniable. Townsend had slipped something inside, a motion so quick that it had gone unnoticed in real time. What had once looked like an airtight arrest now appeared staged, a performance for the cameras in the crowd. Within hours, the video spread across the country, igniting outrage far beyond Washington. Protesters filled the streets, not just demanding justice for Dr. Hayes, but demanding accountability from a system that had allowed Officer Townsend to operate unchecked. Signs read, "We saw the truth and who protects us from them?" The department scrambled to contain the fallout, insisting that the footage was being reviewed, but the public was no longer willing to wait. For every day that passed, the calls grew louder, the distrust deeper. Then, a breakthrough from within the department itself changed everything. A fellow officer, weary of years spent watching Townsend cut corners, came forward as a whistleblower. He confirmed on record what many had suspected, that Townsend had planted evidence in other cases, that complaints had been buried, and that his behavior was not a mistake but a pattern. This revelation shattered what little defense remained. By the time the case reached the courtroom, the nation was watching. Inside, the tension was suffocating as the defense attorney played the leaked video for the jury. Gasps echoed through the chamber as the slowed-down footage revealed the sleight of hand, the planting of evidence, the deception that had threatened to destroy a man's life. The jury sat frozen, their eyes darting between the screen and the officer seated just feet away. And yet, as damning as the evidence appeared, what Officer Bradley Townsend did next, no one saw coming. When the evidence against him became undeniable, many expected Officer Bradley Townsend to resign in disgrace, to apologize for what he had done. But Townsend refused. Instead, he doubled down, declaring himself the true victim of a conspiracy. In statements to the press, he claimed the video had been doctored, that enemies inside the department had orchestrated a setup against him. His voice was defiant, his gaze unwavering, as if the mounting evidence was nothing more than an elaborate lie. What shocked the public even more was his next move. Townsend threatened to reveal what he called a network of corruption within the force itself, superiors who, for years, had buried complaints, shielded him from accountability, and allowed misconduct to thrive unchecked. It was a claim that struck at the very foundation of the department's credibility. Behind closed doors, investigators confirmed what many had feared. Townsend had indeed been protected. Internal reports showed a trail of missing files, altered documents, and supervisors who signed off on dismissals without explanation. His misconduct was not just the result of one rogue officer, but a system that had chosen silence over justice. When the verdict finally came, Dr. Jonathan Hayes was cleared of all charges, his name restored in the eyes of the law. In the courtroom, his wife Maria wept as he walked free, his children rushing to embrace him. But the victory felt incomplete. The man had been exonerated, yet the system that nearly destroyed him remained fractured, scarred by the revelations of corruption at its core. The story closed with a haunting reality. One man had cleared his name, but how many others never get the chance? How many remain buried under convictions built on lies? their lives dismantled by evidence that was never theirs. As those questions lingered, the screen faded to black, revealing the stark truth in numbers. Thousands of wrongful convictions in the United States traced back to planted evidence or officer misconduct. In the silence that followed, one final image appeared. Dr. Jonathan Hayes holding his family in the hallway outside the courtroom, a man who had survived the weight of false accusation, but who would forever carry the knowledge of just how fragile justice could be. Dr. Jonathan Hayes walked free, his family by his side, his name no longer tied to the shame of an accusation that had nearly destroyed him. But as he stepped out of the courthouse, one question lingered in the air. So was justice really served? Or was this just one crack in a broken system that continues to protect those sworn to uphold it? The truth was clear. Hayes had won his battle, but the war for accountability stretched far beyond his case. For every story like his, there were countless others that never reached the light, stories silenced by missing files, buried reports, and officers shielded by the very institutions meant to ensure fairness. And if you thought this case was shocking, wait until you hear about the story where the evidence itself disappeared right inside the police station, leaving an entire prosecution in ruins. That is a case you will not want to miss. Subscribe now so you never miss our upcoming stories of truth, power, and the fight for justice.